The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty streets of New York City. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the roof of his makeshift command post, watching the city through his binoculars. The buildings still stood tall, the roads were still. There, but something was very wrong. The city was too quiet, too peaceful. 6 months ago, the aliens had arrived. They called themselves the Vextai, and they came with promises of peace and guidance. Their ships were massive, floating above every major city on Earth like silver clouds. The world's governments had tried to fight at first, but the aliens were too advanced. Their weapons could disable entire armies without killing a single person. "We come to help," the Vextai had said in their strange, singing voices. "Your species is young and violent. We will teach you to be better." Jake remembered the first time he saw their technology work. A riot had broken out in downtown Chicago when people panicked about the alien ships. The Vextai response was swift. A blue light had swept over the crowd, and suddenly everyone just stopped fighting. They stood there looking confused, like they had forgotten why they were angry. Then they all went home peacefully. The aliens called it behavioral guidance. They said it would help humans evolve beyond their violent nature. Within weeks, they had set up these guidance zones around every major city. The blue fields covered most of the populated areas on Earth. Jake's radio crackled to life. "Captain, we have another group coming in from the city." He climbed down from the roof and walked to the main gate of the compound. His base was located just outside the guidance zone in what used to be a military training facility. About 30 people were walking toward them, moving slowly like they were in a dream. "Open the gates," Jake ordered. The people who entered looked healthy enough, but their eyes were empty. Among them was a woman Jake recognized, Dr. Lisa Hayes, a scientist who had worked for the government before the aliens came. She had been one of the few experts trying to understand the alien technology. "Lisa," Jake called out, "are you okay?" She turned to look at him, but her expression was blank. "Hello, Jake, I am fine. The Vextai have helped me understand that conflict is unnecessary. I feel much more peaceful now." Jake felt his stomach turn. Lisa had been one of the smartest and most determined people he knew. Now she sounded like she was reading from a script. "What happened in the city?" he asked. "The Vextai are expanding the guidance programs," Lisa said in the same flat voice. "They are helping more people find inner peace. Violence and anger are being removed from our thoughts. It is much better this way." Jake watched as the group of newcomers was led to the temporary shelters. All of them had the same empty look in their eyes, the same peaceful but lifeless way of speaking. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Tom Baker, walked up beside him. "How many does that make this week?" "About 200, Jake replied. "And they're all the same. No anger, no fear, no anything." Really, Tom was an engineer who had been working on understanding the alien technology. Unlike the people from the cities, Tom still had fire in his eyes. The guidance zones did not reach this far out, so Jake's team was still free to think and feel normally. "I've been studying the recordings of their broadcasts," Tom said. "The Vextai keep talking about how humans are too aggressive. They say our capacity for violence makes us dangerous to ourselves and others." Jake nodded. He had heard the same speeches. The aliens appeared on every screen and communication device regularly, explaining their mission. They spoke about how they had helped dozens of other species across the galaxy. They always used the same words: guidance, evolution, peace. "Captain," another voice called out. Jake turned to see Sergeant Mike Collins approaching. "We just got word from the European resistance groups. The aliens are starting something new." Jake and Tom followed Mike to the communications room. On the main screen was a grainy video feed from London. The image showed Vextai soldiers, tall, thin beings in white armor, moving through the streets. They were not alone. Human workers followed behind them, carrying tools and equipment. "What are they building?" Jake asked. Mike adjusted the controls to get a clearer picture. "Looks like some kind of processing center. The reports say they're gathering humans for something called behavioral correction." The video showed lines of people waiting peacefully outside a large building. They all had the same calm, empty expressions that Jake had seen in the refugees coming to his base. Vexed-eye guards directed them inside, but there was no force needed. The humans simply followed orders. "This is happening in every major city," Mike continued. "Paris, Tokyo, Mexico City, all of them. The aliens are taking people into these buildings for days at a time. When they come out, they're even more peaceful than before." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of behavioral correction? We don't know yet. But the few reports we're getting suggest that people are losing more than just their anger. They're losing their ability to think independently. Tom leaned forward to study the screen more carefully. "Look at the way they're walking. It's like they're following a program rather than making their own choices." Jake had seen enough. He turned away from the screen and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the edge of the blue guidance field in the distance. It looked peaceful and beautiful, like a wall of soft light. But now he knew it was something much worse. "Sir," Mike said quietly, "there's something else. The aliens made an announcement today. They said that any humans found outside the guidance zones will be brought in for mandatory correction. They're calling us unregulated elements." "When?" Jake asked. "Starting next week. They're sending collection teams to gather everyone who isn't already in the program." Jake stood in silence for a moment, watching the alien light in the distance. For months, he had been trying to figure out how to fight an enemy that was so much more advanced than humanity. The Vextai had technology that could stop wars without firing a shot. They could make entire populations forget how to be angry or afraid. But now Jake realized the aliens had made a mistake. They thought they were dealing with a violent species that needed to be tamed. They did not understand what they were really doing. They were not just stopping human violence. They were erasing everything that made humans human. "Get me a line to all the remaining resistance groups," Jake ordered, "and start preparing our defenses. The aliens want to correct our behavior? Let's show them what human behavior really looks like when we stop holding back." Tom and Mike exchanged glances. They could hear something new in their captain's voice, something that had been building for months as they watched their species being slowly erased. Jake looked out at the guidance field one more time. The Vextai thought they knew what humans were capable of. They had studied human history and seen the wars and conflicts, but they had missed something important. They had never seen what humans could do when they stopped trying to be civilized. The aliens were about to learn. 3 weeks had passed since the Vextai announced their collection program. Jake Morrison watched from his hidden observation post as alien ships landed in the valley below. Today was the day they had been dreading. The ships were different from the massive city-hovering vessels. These were smaller, designed for ground operations. White-armored Vextai soldiers emerged, followed by human workers carrying strange devices. Jake recognized some of the humans. They had been resistance fighters just months ago. "How many?" whispered Tom Baker, crouched beside him with recording equipment. "2 ships. Maybe 40 aliens, twice as many humans," Jake replied, adjusting his binoculars. The Vextai moved with purpose toward a small town called Millfield, population 3,000. It was one of the last communities still outside the guidance zones. Jake had been working with them for weeks, trying to organize some kind of defense. Through his radio earpiece, Jake heard the panicked voice of Mayor Roberts from Millfield. "They're here. The aliens are setting up some kind of device in the town square." Jake could see it happening. The Vextai were assembling a tall metal structure, while their human helpers directed the townspeople to gather around it. Even from This distance, Jake could see that the people looked scared. They still had their emotions, their ability to think freely. "It's another guidance field generator," Tom said, studying the device through his scope. "But this one looks different, more powerful." The Vextai commander, taller than the others, began speaking to the crowd. Jake could not hear the words, but he knew what was happening. The aliens always gave the same speech about peace and evolution. Before activating their technology. "Jake," Robert's voice crackled through the radio. "They're saying this is behavioral correction, not just guidance. They want to take groups of people back to their ships for processing." Jake felt his jaw clench. Processing. Like humans were just data to be cleaned up. "Tell your people to stay calm," Jake responded. "We're watching." But even as he said it, Jake knew there was nothing he could do. His force of 30 soldiers could not fight alien technology. They had tried raids on smaller outposts before, but the Vextai weapons could disable their equipment and knock them unconscious without killing them. The alien commander finished speaking and stepped back. The device in the town square began to glow with the familiar blue light. Jake watched as the people of Millfield suddenly went quiet. Their scared expressions faded into the same blank calmness he had seen so many times before. "No," Tom whispered beside him, but it was not over. The Vextai soldiers began separating people into groups. Children from parents, husbands from wives. They did it gently, almost kindly, but the separated families did not resist. The guidance field had already taken away their ability to fight. Back, Jake's radio came alive with voices from other observation posts around the valley. "They're loading people onto the ships," reported Sergeant Collins. "Families are being split up. The children are going on the first ship," added another voice. Jake watched through his binoculars as kids as young as 5 were led onto the alien vessels. Their parents stood watching with empty smiles, no longer capable of feeling the terror that should have driven them to protect their children. "Sir," Tom said quietly, "we have to do something." Jake knew Tom was right, but what could they do? Every time humans had tried to fight back, the Vextai had simply expanded their guidance fields and made more people docile. It was like fighting an enemy that could take away your will to fight. The first alien ship lifted off with its cargo of children. Jake felt something twist in his stomach as he watched it disappear into the sky. Where were they taking them? What was behavioral correction going to do to those kids? His radio crackled again. This time it was Dr. Lisa Hayes speaking from inside Millfield. Her voice was still flat and emotionless, but she was trying to communicate something. "Jake," she said slowly, "I remember things sometimes. When the field gets weaker, they are not just changing behavior. They are removing parts of our minds." Jake grabbed his radio. "Lisa, what do you mean?" "The correction process. I have seen it. They take away memory, personality, individual thought. They want to make us all the same. Perfect and obedient." The transmission cut out. Jake tried calling back, but there was no response. "Captain," Colin's voice came through the radio. "The second ship is loading up. They're taking the adults now." Jake watched as more people were herded onto the remaining vessel. Among them, he could see Mayer, Roberts, and several others he had worked with. They walked onto the ship like they were going on a pleasant trip. "How long before they come for us?" Tom asked. Jake knew the answer. His base was the largest remaining resistance point in the region. The Vextai would not ignore it much longer. "Maybe a few days," Jake said. "Maybe less." They watched as the second ship took off. Millfield was now empty except for Vextai soldiers and their human helpers. The aliens began setting up a permanent base, installing more guidance equipment and communication devices. Jake and his team made their way back to their vehicles, hidden in the forest. The ride back to base was silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing. They had just watched 3,000 people lose their humanity, and there was nothing they could have done to stop it. Back at the compound, Jake called a meeting of all his remaining people. 37 soldiers, engineers, and civilians sat in the main hall, looking at him with a mixture of fear and determination. "You all saw what happened today," Jake began. "The aliens are not just pacifying humans anymore. They are erasing us completely. What are our options?" asked Dr. Sandra Price, one of the few scientists still at the base. "We can surrender and hope they treat us gently," Jake said. "Or we can run and hope they don't follow. Or ... Or what?" Tom asked. Jake looked around the room at the faces of the last free humans in his area. They were scared, but they were still capable of being scared. They could still think, still feel, still choose. "Or we stop playing by their rules," Jake said. "The Vexti think they understand humans because they have studied our history. They have seen our wars and conflicts. But they have only seen us when we were trying to be civilized." "What do you mean?" Sandra asked. Jake felt something cold and hard settling in his chest. For months, he had been trying to fight an honorable war against an enemy that did not understand honor. He had been following rules of engagement while watching his species get erased. "I mean, we show them what humans are really like when we stop holding back," Jake said. "When we stop trying to be the good guys." The room went quiet. Jake could see the understanding dawning on their faces. They had been fighting like soldiers, like civilized people. But the Vexti were not treating them like soldiers or civilized people. They were treating them like animals to be domesticated. "The children from Millfield," Tom said quietly. "We need to get them back." Jake nodded. "We need to get them all back. And we need to make sure the aliens never do this again." Dr. Price leaned forward. "How do we fight technology we don't understand?" "We don't fight their technology," Jake replied. "We fight them. And we use the one thing they clearly don't understand about humans." "Which is?" Jake looked out the window at the distant glow of the guidance fields. Somewhere out there, thousands of humans were being processed, corrected, erased, including children who had been stolen from their families. "Fear," Jake said. "The Vexti have never learned to be afraid." Tom Baker worked through the night in his makeshift laboratory. The room was filled with broken alien devices, computer screens, and electronic equipment scattered across every surface. He had been trying to understand the Vexti technology for weeks, but tonight felt different. Tonight he was angry. "Show me the frequency readings again," Tom called out to his assistant, Dr. Sandra Price. Sandra looked up from her computer screen. "The guidance field operates on a very specific electromagnetic frequency. It seems to target the part of the human brain that controls emotions and independent thought." Tom nodded, studying the waveform patterns on his monitor. "But it's not just blocking emotions, it's rewriting them. Look at this." He pointed to a section of the data they had collected from the Millfield incident. "The field doesn't just turn off anger or fear. It replaces those feelings with artificial calm and obedience. So if we could disrupt that frequency," Sandra started. "We could break the field," Tom finished. "At least temporarily." Jake Morrison walked into the lab, looking tired but determined. "How temporarily?" Tom looked up at his captain. "Maybe an hour. Maybe less. The Vexti would detect the disruption and adjust their signals." "That might be enough," Jake said. "We got word from the other resistance groups. Similar attacks happened in 12 different locations yesterday. The aliens are moving faster than we expected." Sandra pulled up a map on her screen showing red dots scattered across the continent. "These are confirmed behavioral correction sites. The Vexti are taking people to central processing ships, then sending them back to their communities completely changed." "Changed how?" Jake asked. "We interviewed some of the people who came back," Sandra replied. "They don't just act peaceful. They can't think of alternatives to what they're told to do. They've lost the ability to question orders or make independent decisions. Tom felt his anger growing stronger. The Vextai weren't just conquering humanity. They were erasing human consciousness itself. I think I can build a device to disrupt their signals. But it would only work in a small area, maybe a few city blocks. How small? Jake asked. Maybe enough to free 100 people at once, Tom said. But Captain, there's something else. When people are freed from the guidance field suddenly, they don't just get their emotions back. They get them back all at once. Jake raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Sandra answered for Tom. We tested it on a small scale with some of the people who came to our base. When the artificial calm is suddenly removed, they experience all the emotions that were suppressed at the same time. Fear, anger, grief, everything hits them at once. That could be dangerous, Jake said, or useful, Tom replied. Sir, these people have been watching their families get taken apart, their children stolen, their entire lives destroyed. And they haven't been allowed to feel anything about it. When that dam breaks, Jake understood. They're going to be very angry, Tom nodded. And they're going to want revenge. Over the next 3 days, Tom worked to build his disruption device. It was crude, a modified EMP generator, connected to a signal amplifier that could broadcast on the same frequency as the Vextai guidance fields. But it might work. Jake chose their first target carefully. A small town called Riverside, population 800, had been taken by the aliens 2 days ago. The people were still being held in a temporary processing center while the Vextai set up permanent facilities. Jake's team of 20 soldiers approached Riverside at dawn. They could see the blue glow of the guidance field covering the town like a dome. Vextai ships sat in the fields outside, and alien soldiers patrolled the streets. Remember, Jake whispered into his radio, we're not here to fight the aliens. We're here to wake up the humans. Tom set up his device on a hill overlooking the town. I need to get closer to be effective, he said. The signal has to be strong enough to overpower their field. Jake and his team moved into position around the town. Through their scopes, they could see humans moving around inside the guidance field. They all had the same calm, empty expressions that had become so familiar. Ready? Tom asked through the radio. Do it, Jake replied. Tom activated his device. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the blue glow over Riverside began to flicker. The alien patrol stopped and looked around in confusion. Suddenly, the guidance field collapsed. The effect on the humans was immediate and shocking. People in Evankalving Inko and thus Palfenvust. The streets stopped walking and looked around like they were seeing the world for the first time. Then the screaming started, not screams of fear, screams of rage. A woman near the town center suddenly remembered that her children had been taken 3 days ago. A man realized that his wife was gone and he didn't know where. Families remembered being separated. Parents remembered being forced to watch their kids led away to alien ships. All of the suppressed emotions came flooding back at once. Oh God, Sandra whispered over the radio. Look at them. Through his binoculars, Jake watched as the freed humans began to move. But they weren't moving randomly. They were organizing. The rage was bringing them together, focusing them on a single target. The Vextai soldiers. The aliens seemed confused by what was happening. They had never seen humans act this way. In their experience, humans were either peacefully obedient or easily controlled. But these humans were different. They were angry in a way that made them dangerous. A group of about 50 humans surrounded one of the alien patrols. The Vextai tried to use their non-lethal weapons, but the humans just kept coming. They had improvised weapons, rocks, sticks, tools, and they were using them with a fury that surprised even Jake. Captain, Tom called out, the aliens are calling for backup. More ships are coming. Jake could see them in the distance, 3 Vextai vessels approaching rapidly. How long before the field comes back online? Maybe 5 minutes, Tom replied. They're already adjusting their frequency. But 5 minutes was enough. The freed humans had found the temporary processing center where their families were being held. Jake watched as they broke down the doors and began freeing the people inside. Interesting thing was how organized they were. Despite their rage, they were working together efficiently. They weren't just attacking randomly, they were rescuing their people and disrupting alien operations with tactical precision. They're not just angry, Sandra observed. They're thinking. Clearly, while they're angry, I've never seen anything like it. Jake understood what she meant. The humans weren't losing control, they were gaining it. The rage was making them more focused, more determined, more effective. The Vextai reinforcements arrived and began setting up a new guidance field generator. But the humans had learned something important in those 5 minutes. They had learned that the aliens could be fought, that the guidance fields could be broken, that their emotions, their anger, their human nature was stronger than alien technology. As the new field activated and the humans began to calm down, Jake saw something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. They remembered what it felt like to be fully human again, and they weren't going to forget. Tom, Jake said into his radio, can you build more of these devices? Already working on it, sir, Tom replied. I think I can make them smaller, more portable. Maybe something a small team could carry. Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. Good, because we're going to need a lot of them. The Vextai had made a mistake. They thought they could control humans by taking away their emotions. But they had never considered what would happen when those emotions came back all at once. They had never imagined that human rage could be so focused, so organized, so effective. The aliens were about to learn that there was a difference between human violence and human warfare. And they were going to learn it the hard way. 2 weeks after the Riverside incident, Jake Morrison sat in what used to be the communications center of a Vextai outpost. The alien equipment was still functional, but the operators were gone. Not dead. Jake's people had learned that killing Vextai soldiers only brought more reinforcements. Instead, they had found something much more effective. They had learned to make the aliens afraid. Report, Jake said to Tom Baker, who was studying the alien communication logs. 15 outposts abandoned in the last week, Tom replied. The Vextai are pulling back to their main bases. They're calling us unpredictable elements in their reports. Jake smiled. Unpredictable was exactly what they wanted to be. It had started with simple psychological warfare. Jake's teams would free small groups of humans using Tom's disruption devices, then disappear before the aliens could respond. But the freed humans remembered everything: the separation from their families, the processing, the mind control. And they were angry. The Vextai expected resistance. They had protocols for dealing with violent uprisings. But they did not expect what came next. Dr. Sandra Price walked into the room carrying a tablet. The fear response is working better than we hoped, she said. I've been monitoring their communication channels. The Vextai soldiers are requesting transfers away from human territories. Why? Jake asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Because we're not fighting them the way other species do, Sandra explained. Most alien species they've conquered were either completely peaceful or fought traditional battles. But humans are doing things they've never seen before. Jake nodded. It had been his idea to stop fighting like soldiers and start fighting like humans. The Vextai understood military tactics, but they did not understand terror. The first change had been simple. Instead of attacking alien positions directly, Jake's teams would wait for the Vextai to sleep, then surround their camps at night. They would not attack. They would just wait outside the perimeter, making noise, letting the aliens know they were there. The Vextai had technology that could detect human presence, but they could not understand why the humans were not attacking. Night after night, the aliens would wait for an assault that never came. The psychological pressure was enormous. "Sir," Tom said, looking up from the alien computer, "we have a problem. The Vextai are planning to evacuate all humans from a 50-mile radius around their main command ship. They want to create a dead zone with no human presence." Jake felt his jaw tighten. "How many people?" "About 100,000, Tom replied. "They're calling it a security protocol." Sandra looked worried. "If they remove all humans from that area, we'll lose our ability to operate there. And those people will be taken for complete behavioral correction." Jake stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, he could see smoke rising from several locations where his teams were conducting operations. They had been making progress, but the aliens were adapting faster than expected. "What's the timeline?" he asked. 3 days, Tom said. "They're starting with the outer communities and working inward." Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. "Then we don't wait anymore. We hit their command ship directly." Both Tom and Sandra stared at him. "Sir," Sandra said carefully, "that ship has shields and weapons that could destroy our entire force." "I'm not talking about a military attack," Jake replied. "I'm talking about something they've never experienced before." Over the next day, Jake gathered his best people and explained his plan. It was not complicated, but it was dangerous in ways that went beyond physical risk. "We're going to infiltrate their command ship," Jake said. "But we're not going there to plant bombs or steal information. We're going there to make them feel helpless." Tom looked confused. "How do we do that?" "By showing them what humans do to things that threaten our families," Jake replied. The plan required 6 small teams working together. Each team had a different mission, but they all served the same purpose: to make the Vextai understand that humans were not just another species to be managed. The first team would create diversions around the ship's perimeter. The second team would disable the ship's external sensors. The third team would plant Tom's disruption devices throughout the ship to free any humans being held there. But the most important teams were the last 3. Their job was psychological warfare of a type the Vextai had never encountered. Jake led one of these teams himself. They entered the ship through a maintenance access that Tom had identified from studying captured alien technical manuals. The interior was clean, bright, and eerily quiet. "Remember," Jake whispered to his team through their radio headsets, "we're not here to kill anyone. We're here to teach." They moved through the corridors like ghosts. The Vextai security systems were designed to detect weapons and explosives, but Jake's team carried neither. Instead, they carried something much more dangerous to the alien psyche. They carried the means to take away the aliens' sense of control. The first Vextai soldier they encountered was alone in a communication room. Jake's team surrounded him. Silently, the alien looked up to see 5 humans standing around him, but none of them were pointing weapons. Instead, they just stood there and watched him. The alien tried to call for help, but Tom's disruption device was interfering with his communications. He tried to leave, but the humans blocked his path without threatening him. He tried to use his weapon, but one of the humans simply took it away from him, not violently, just calmly removed it from his hands. Then they left him there, alone and powerless, while they moved on to the next target. Throughout the ship, Jake's teams were conducting similar operations. They would isolate individual Vextai, take away their ability to communicate or defend themselves, then leave them unharmed but helpless. The psychological effect was devastating. The aliens had never experienced being prey before. They had always been the ones in control, the ones with superior technology and authority. Now they were being hunted by creatures they had dismissed as primitive. But the worst part for the Vextai was that the humans were not trying to kill them. Death they could understand, it was a normal part of warfare. But this systematic removal of their power and dignity was something they had no protocols for. In the ship's central command center, Jake found what he was looking for: the HFY commander who had been overseeing the human behavioral correction program. The alien was tall, with the typical white armor and singing voice that all HFY possessed. "You cannot be here," the commander said when Jake entered the room. "This area is restricted." Jake looked around the command center. It was filled with screens showing human settlements, processing facilities, and behavioral correction statistics. On one wall was a display showing the planned evacuation zones. "Restricted to who?" Jake asked calmly. The commander tried to activate an alarm, but his controls had already been disabled by Tom's team. He tried to call for guards, but his communication system was jammed. He reached for a weapon, but Jake moved faster and removed it from his grasp. "What do you want?" the commander asked. For the first time, Jake heard something new in a HFY voice: uncertainty. "I want you to understand something," Jake replied. "You came to our world thinking you could control us by taking away our emotions, but you made a mistake." Jake activated a portable display that Tom had prepared. It showed footage from every human liberation they had conducted: people remembering their stolen children, families reuniting, communities organizing to resist. "You thought human emotions made us weak," Jake continued. "You tried to remove our anger, our fear, our love for our families. But those emotions are not our weakness, they are our strength." The alien commander watched the footage with growing alarm. "Your species is violent and unstable. We came to help you evolve beyond your primitive nature." Jake looked at the commander with cold eyes. "You didn't try to help us evolve. You tried to erase us. And now you're going to learn what happens when you threaten the human's family." Jake did not hurt the commander. He did not need to. Instead, he showed him something much more terrifying than physical violence. He showed him the future. "Every one of your outposts will be abandoned," Jake said. "Every one of your soldiers will request transfer away from human space. Not because we're going to kill you, but because you'll never feel safe around us again. You cannot maintain this resistance," the commander said, but his voice was shaking. "We have reinforcements coming from across the galaxy," Jake smiled. "Good, send them all. Let every alien species in the galaxy know what happens when you try to domesticate humanity. Let them know that humans are not a species you want to anger." As Jake's teams completed their mission and prepared to leave the ship, they had accomplished something unprecedented in HFY experience. They had invaded the alien command center, neutralized its defenses, and completely broken the psychological confidence of the enemy, all without killing anyone. The message was clear: humans were not just another primitive species to be managed. They were predators who had learned to use fear as a weapon. The HFY evacuation began at dawn. Jake Morrison watched from a hilltop as massive alien transport ships descended toward the remaining human settlements. After weeks of psychological warfare, the aliens had made their decision. They were leaving Earth, but they were not leaving empty-handed. "They're taking everyone," Tom Baker reported through his radio. "Every human in the guidance zones. The ships are loading them up for transport off-world." Jake felt his stomach turn. The aliens were admitting defeat, but they were trying to take humanity with them. Millions of people, already mentally broken by months of behavioral correction, were being herded onto ships bound for unknown destinations. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Maybe 6 hours before the main fleet departs," Tom replied. "But sir, there's something else. I'm picking up communications between the HFY ships and other alien species across the galaxy." Jake raised his binoculars to study the nearest transport ship. He could see humans walking calmly up the loading ramps, their faces empty of emotion or resistance. "What kind of communications?" "Warning messages," Tom said. The Vexti are telling other species about what happened here. They're marking human space as a danger zone. Dr. Sandra Price joined the conversation from her position near the communications equipment. Jake, you need to hear this. I've been monitoring their transmissions for the last hour. She patched the alien communications through to Jake's radio. The Vexti voices were singing in their usual harmonic tones, but there was something different about the sound. Fear. Species designation, human. Behavioral profile. Unpredictable aggressive response to containment protocols. Recommendation. Avoid contact. Psychological warfare capabilities exceed standard parameters. Do not attempt pacification procedures. Jake listened as ship after ship broadcast similar warnings. The Vexti were not just retreating from Earth. They were spreading word throughout the galaxy that humans were too dangerous to approach. Captain Mike Collins called out from his observation post. Movement at the main command ship. Looks like their leadership is preparing for departure. Jake made a decision. All teams converge on the command ship. We're going to have a final conversation with the Vexti commander. Within an hour, Jake's entire resistance force had surrounded the alien command vessel. It was the same ship they had infiltrated weeks earlier, but now it was preparing for departure. The Vexti had loaded their equipment and personnel, and the ship's engines were warming up. Jake approached under a white flag, an old human symbol that the aliens had learned to recognize during their occupation. The Vexti commander, the same one Jake had confronted before, emerged to meet him. You have come to witness our departure, the commander said. His harmonic voice carried notes of defeat and exhaustion. I've come to make you an offer, Jake replied. The commander's posture shifted slightly, a sign of confusion in Vexti body language. What offer could your species possibly make that would interest us? Jake gestured toward the transport ships loading humans in the distance. Let them go, all of them. Leave Earth completely, and we'll give you something in return. What could you give us that we cannot take? Jake smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. Your lives. The commander stepped back. You threaten. U.S. No, Jake said calmly. I'm explaining reality. You're taking millions of humans with you when you leave. Do you really think we're going to let that happen? Your resistance force is small. We have superior technology and numbers. Jake looked around at his people positioned throughout the area. 37 humans with improvised weapons and captured alien equipment, facing an entire fleet of advanced spacecraft. By any military calculation, they were hopelessly outmatched. You're right, Jake agreed. We can't stop you by force. But we don't need to. He activated a portable display that Tom had prepared. It showed detailed technical specifications of Vexti ships, crew rosters, and operational procedures, information that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. How did you acquire this data? The commander demanded. Your own people gave it to us, Jake replied. Do you want to know why? The commander remained silent, but Jake could see the fear growing in his alien features. Because they're terrified of us, Jake continued. Your soldiers, your technicians, your crew members, they've all been requesting transfers away from human operations. Some of them are so scared, they've been sharing classified information just to get our promise that we'll leave them alone. Jake activated another display showing psychological profiles of Vexti personnel. Your species has never encountered an enemy that fights the way we do. You understand military tactics, but you don't understand terror. You know how to conquer civilizations, but you've never been hunted. What is your point? The commander asked, though his voice was shaking. My point is that if you take those humans with you, we'll follow you, Jake said simply. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. We'll learn to build ships. We'll track down every world you've conquered, every species you've pacified, and we'll teach them what we've learned. The commander's eyes widened as he understood the implication. You'll teach them to resist, he whispered. We'll teach them to be afraid, Jake corrected. Just like we taught you. Jake gestured to the transport ships. You came here thinking you could domesticate humanity. Instead, you've created something you've never seen before. A species that knows how to make fear into a weapon. Do you really want to take that knowledge to other worlds? The commander was quiet for a long moment, processing what Jake had said. Around them, other Vextai personnel were listening to the conversation with growing alarm. If we leave the humans here, the commander finally said, what guarantee do we have that your species will not spread beyond this world? Jake considered the question carefully. None, he said honestly. Humans are curious. Eventually, we'll build ships and explore the galaxy. But if you leave us in peace, if you spread the word that human space is to be avoided, then maybe we'll be content to stay in our own corner of the universe. And if we take your people with us? Jake's expression hardened. Then we'll spend every moment of our existence learning how to hunt you down. We'll turn your own conquered species against you. We'll teach the galaxy that the Vextai can be beaten, can be made afraid, can be destroyed. The commander looked at the transport ships, then back at Jake. The weight of the decision was clear in his alien features. You would condemn your own people to this aggressive existence? The commander asked. Our people were always aggressive, Jake replied. You just tried to hide it. But now that we know what we're capable of when we stop holding back, do you really think we'll ever be the same? The commander activated his communicator and began speaking in rapid Vextai. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone of surrender. Within minutes, the transport ships began unloading their human cargo. Millions of people, still under the influence of the guidance fields, walked calmly off the alien vessels and back toward their communities. The behavioral correction will fade with time, the commander told Jake. But the psychological changes to your species will not. You have awakened something in humanity that cannot be put back to sleep. Jake nodded. I know. Do you understand what you have done? The commander asked. Your species will never again be innocent. You will always know that you are capable of this level of calculated cruelty. Jake looked at his people, soldiers who had learned to use fear as a weapon, scientists who had turned their knowledge towards psychological warfare, ordinary humans who had discovered they could be predators when their families were threatened. Maybe, Jake said, but we'll also know that nobody can take away what makes us human. The Vextai ships lifted off one by one, leaving Earth's atmosphere for the last time. As the final vessel disappeared into space, Jake received reports from around the globe. The guidance fields were shutting down. The processing centers were being abandoned. Humanity was free, but freedom had come at a cost. As the artificial calm faded from the liberated humans, they began to remember what had been done to them. The anger, the grief, the rage, all of it came flooding back. The difference was that now they knew how to use those emotions. They had learned from Jake's resistance that human nature, when unleashed, was something even advanced alien species feared. Standing on the hilltop, watching the last alien ship disappear among the stars, Jake wondered if they had saved humanity or doomed it. They had proven that humans could be more vicious than any enemy imagined, but the victory had changed them fundamentally. Across the galaxy, alien civilizations were receiving the Vextil warnings about humanity. Earth was being marked as a system to avoid, a world inhabited by creatures too dangerous to approach. Jake looked up at the stars, knowing that word of human savagery was spreading, and wondered what kind of future they had created for their children. They had their freedom, but they had paid for it by revealing their true nature to the universe.